Hey everybody, we got a new feature for you today. We often, as we are inclined to do, take some of the issues of the day, whatever's trending, whatever's going on, things that are important. We want to bring to you, a deeper dive to show you the reality of it, the truth on the ground, all that kind of thing. Well, we want to kind of a special effort today, and we may start doing this every Friday. It's kind of the Daniel Davis deep dive intel brief, what we learned during the week. And so we're going to kind of wrap up some of the key things that we talked about during the week that, in case you didn't get a chance to see all of them, this gives you a chance as a wrap up to see what really some of the more important things of the week that we discovered or that we brought to your attention. So some of the things are what you learned in the past. And we've also got some additional things because it is an intel brief. And we're actually going to be talking about some intel issues toward the end of this segment. But let's jump right into it. The first one we want to talk about is the United States a rental force for use for, well, whoever wants it? People like me and the millions of others who signed up did so to defend our country from attack. Defend, not to go on the offense because we don't like somebody else and it's just another tool to use by somebody else for their benefit. Because I assure you, Israel would love to have the U.S. Armed Forces. They would love to have our Air Force and our ammunition and our weapons and our industrial capacity. Absolutely. They would love it because that would make their life so much easier. I'm not interested in making life easier for Israel to choose a war that they don't like somebody in their neighborhood, so they want to try to draw us into a war to help them do their dirty work. I'm not for that. I would not sacrifice one American service member, not one, to go fund a war that someone else chose. And look, it's bad enough that the U.S. chose a bunch of wars of our own in the past, which are painful for me to remember, some of which I participated in. So I certainly don't want it to be choosing, someone else's choice using our troops of that. And that goes not just for the Israel situation, that goes for Ukraine. So don't get any crazy ideas about, one day telling us, Russia is continuing to move on and only the help of Western troops in our country can keep us from falling. I can see that coming. And I'm already just going to put everybody on notice that answer is going to be a hard no. And let's just go ahead and keep going on down the list. You got Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. We have some treaties to help them defend themselves and to sell them weapons and to make themselves more impenetrable and make them not an attractive target for China to ever invade. And we'll keep doing that. But it's not going to include one American troop, folks, and we're not going to sacrifice one aircraft carrier to the bottom of the Pacific Ocean. Scores or hundreds of American aircraft, not going to do it. It's not in our interest. It'd be catastrophic for us. So that really applies across the board. I was really excited about it to talk about the Israeli situation because there's lots of actions that we're still awaiting on to find out what Iran does in retaliation to having their embassy bombed. But I'm definitely out on any American troops getting involved in a war that we don't need to fight. Next, moving on down there, the next thing, going back to the Russia-Ukraine war, there's some views and some people seem to have this opinion that whether Ukraine wins or loses is a factor of the United States Congress.
That if Congress does not help Ukraine, Ukraine will lose the war. If Ukraine loses the war, other states will be attacked. And that's a fact.
Doug, is that a fact?
Well, he should rephrase his remarks to say that Ukraine, if we're smart, will survive the war. But Zelensky and my friends will not. That's the truth. And that's really where we're headed. I remember listening to Lyndon Johnson back in the 1960s, which now tells everybody how old I am, talk about the fact that if we don't stop the VC in Vietnam, the communists in Southeast Asia, we're going to be fighting them in the streets of Los Angeles. Then I remember hearing John Abizaid, who became the 4-star in Iraq shortly after the 2003 campaign ended, tell everybody, well, if we don't fight them here, we're going to be fighting them at home in our own country. I mean, how many times do we have to listen to the same bullshit lie for Americans to wake up and smell the coffee? Clearly, Zelensky has no incentive to wake up and smell what he's shoveling. His life is on the line, and his friends are. They're done.
And look, I as we say often, I get Zelensky's position. I don't bemoan him saying those kind of things and doing anything he can to try and win the war. But where I do find some fault is when he refuses to acknowledge the truth on the ground and continues to have an unsubstantiated and an unbased hope more like a fantasy that, oh, if only I can get some money from Congress, then we can change everything on the ground. We just need more cash. And it's not more cash. As if you saw our previous episode here, we went into some detail on how it's a lot more than just money that they need. The balance is overwhelmingly and indisputably in Russia's favor and irrevocably. It's not coming back. And so for American commentators and officials to keep pretending otherwise and to keep saying, no, we just need to take $60 billion more out of your pockets and give it to Ukraine, then that'll make a difference, because it won't. And so why would we want to take more money out of American pockets that's only going to increase the cost perversely for Ukraine to lose? It's just not going to happen. So that's one of the things we learned this week on Daniel Davis Deep Dive. Then let's move back to the Middle East, because one of the other claims from Netanyahu was that the Israel is just one step away from victory. Seems like every time you turn around, Netanyahu's trying to use Hamas to prevent any kind of resolution that's going to have anything to do for the Palestinian people.
Right. Hamas for Netanyahu, Danny, is his lifeblood in many ways. Let's go back to that first clip you played where he's rattling off all the different battle damage estimates.
The achievements of the war are great. We've eliminated 19 out of 24 Hamas battalions, including senior commanders. We've killed, wounded, or captured a significant number of Hamas terrorists. We've cleared Shifa, as well as many other terrorist headquarters. We've destroyed rocket manufacturing plants, war rooms, weapons, and ammunition caches. And we continue to systematically destroy the underground tunnels. We're a step away from victory.
Right. We've destroyed this. We've destroyed that. Victory is around the corner. It's too bad Israel doesn't have an aircraft carrier for him to fly a plane and land on, like George W. Bush did, right, 21 years ago, and declare victory.
Mission accomplished.
Just that recitation by Netanyahu. We've destroyed this, that, the other thing, these battle damage estimates, the body count, if you will. You have to understand what he's saying, appreciate the significance of the destruction, as we're certainly seeing with the video coming from Khan Yunis today, where the reports are that Khan Yunis, who everyone thought, Gaza City in the north, have been completely destroyed. And now that people are getting into Khan Yunis, very possible that the destruction of Khan Yunis is even more severe than the destruction of Gaza City. Initial reports are 80% of the city's destroyed. So, certainly we can't really fully dismiss what Netanyahu's saying about how much the Israeli army has destroyed in Gaza, because it's clear it serves their strategic purpose of making Gaza uninhabitable in order to force Palestinian people to leave, right? But it doesn't do anything in terms of affecting the political situation. It certainly doesn't do anything in terms of positively affecting the circumstances of the resistance in Palestine towards occupation. What it does actually is strengthens the Palestinian resolve, the Palestinian steadfastness, the desire to be rid of the occupation. So these things that he was addressing in that first clip, yes, they may be true, but that certainly does not tell the whole story. And in fact, leaves out so much about, well, have you actually defeated the spirit of the Palestinian people? And you have not, and you will not, because that's impossible to do. The strategic folly of this, how this is actually going to make things worse for Israel. But in the near time, it's Benjamin Netanyahu's political survival. It all depends upon that Palestinian resistance still being there, right? Because as soon as it's clear that Netanyahu no longer has the Hamas crutch to lean on, he can't wave the Hamas flag around and say, if you get rid of me, Hamas is going to come and they're going to kill us all. As soon as that narrative is not even dissolved, but just diminished, then Netanyahu's political survival is in real jeopardy.
It's so ironic to me that you have two separate issues with the Israeli-Hamas war and the Ukraine-Russia war, where unwillingness to acknowledge reality is dooming the situation to failure. On the Ukraine side, you have Zelensky from a position of weakness, unwilling to acknowledge that his opponent is much stronger, and so he's trying to do the impossible. In Netanyahu's case, you weirdly have him from a position of strength, but also unwilling to see the reality of the situation and thinking he's going to win anyway. It's obvious that what the problem is in Russia-Ukraine war. It's less obvious here. But let me just point out to you, this is why it's so important and why we've included this in intel brief, because the intelligence issue is crucial here. Netanyahu has set himself up to objectively destroy the Hamas battalions. He keeps citing that over and over. That's why I said in that clip there just a few days ago, we're a step away because all we have to do is get those last 4 battalions in Rafah and war will be over. That's the implication. And nothing could be further from the truth. It is hard for me to imagine how he cannot know that he is creating so much more animosity to Israel than ever existed prior to October the 7th with what he's doing now, because he is systematically killing tens of thousands of people. He has literally wiped out their chance to have even just a normal, ordinary life with the ability to live, to have stores, electricity, to get transportation, to have police officers just, keeping the peace. All those things that any civil society has for civil order has been systematically wiped out by Israel. So unless he still has some weird twisted hope of literally wiping out all of the Palestinians, which I don't think that even he has that. Maybe he's hoping that against hope that Egypt and Jordan are going to go ahead and accept 2 million Palestinians out of there. There's no evidence that that's going to be the case. If that hope doesn't happen, then he has created this almost a tornado, a permanent tornado that's going to exist within those gates, and it's never going to be pacified. Because as Matt Hope pointed out there so eloquently, if you don't have hope as a people, then all you have left is resistance, because you're not going to break a people. It's just people are just resilient that way. They're not just going to literally all just drop their shoulders and just surrender and just become mindless numbs and just eating food that they get from the relief truck every day for the foreseeable future. It's not going to happen. They're going to get angry. They're going to rise up, and they're going to do as much as they can against Israel. And even outside of the Israeli area, all these seeds are planted that are going to come back to haunt Israel in the future. So this issue, just like the Ukraine war, is going to have problems long beyond the time that the conflict actually comes to an end. But for Netanyahu to claim we're a step away from victory is self-delusion. Okay, moving on to the next one here. Here's an interesting thought, probably a question you wouldn't think of answering here, but it's kind of pertinent. What is the easiest way to start World War III? What's the best way to start World War III? Is it A, to negotiate an end to the Ukraine war and end it so that Ukraine gets as much territory as it can, but the fighting stops? Or is it B, continue to push for a war and possibly even unseat Russia and push them to where they use nuclear weapons? Just show of hands. I'm looking out there. If you could, don't see any hands up out there, because you're all sane people. And it's unfortunate that those things are never called out. Russia probably has no capacity to take all of Ukraine. That's debatable. It would take a lot more than what they have now. They would have to mobilize probably another 1 million troops at the least and take another year or so to build up enough physical infrastructure and capacity to do it, which they haven't done so far. What they have right now is enough to take probably up to the Dnieper River, but almost certainly no more than that. But absolutely no possibility that they would march 1 inch into a NATO country. What they can match NATO, though, is on the nuclear front. If you want to avoid World War III, then you will acknowledge ground truth reality in the battlefield, and you'll rightfully conclude that we need to seek a negotiated settlement. I cannot understand in any way why people in the West and in the United States especially are oblivious to these facts, that if you want to prevent the escalation of war and potentially the possibility of nuclear conflict, that you should want to end the war as quickly as possible at the lowest possible cost. That just stands to reason, but it doesn't seem to be having an influence on people, because they still keep actually saying the opposite, that somehow if we don't get a victory for Ukraine and a defeat for Russia, and it has to be both of those from their position, then they claim that increases the chance for World War III. But that's irrational. It's illogical. What possible motivation would Russia have since 2007? They've been saying that they are violently opposed to NATO on their border, that they would then defeat Ukraine, leave a rump state buffer between them, and then go on the offensive into NATO. The very thing that has mobilized them and given them fear to be willing to go to war to stop in the first place. Of course, they're not going to do that. That's irrational. And I think a lot of people get some comfort into saying, well, Russia is evil, and so they're irrational, and they're going to do something that doesn't make sense. And I'm afraid of that. So let's go and take away that possibility. But that's just irrational, folks. He's not going to do something. No matter what you want to say about Putin, he's rational. If you want to say he's immoral and unethical and evil and all that, make your own choices on that. But even if you've come to that conclusion, you can't come to the conclusion he's irrational. He's, in fact, has been one of the most rational leaders, consistently so, from 1999 when he first came into power all the way through to this day. Everything he has done confirms this. He's very calculated on how he uses power. He's careful not to escalate. He's had many opportunities to do so, and he hasn't, because ultimately he genuinely does want security for his country. And to attack into NATO at any point is suicide. Absolutely suicide. He himself goes overboard to say conventionally we can't match NATO. And look, when we haven't been at war in a long time, and probably if we did fight on a conventional level, if somehow nuclear weapons were off the table, the NATO side, frankly, would suffer a lot of losses because we wouldn't do near as good as what we think we are. But we have the industrial capacity. We have the manpower. We can overcome it. Just like Russia was able to overcome its terrible start because of their manpower capacity, and their industrial capacity was eventually able to right the problem. And now then they're just swamping on the Ukraine side. That would happen in reverse if Russia were to ever go conventionally into NATO. Everybody knows this. All of the NATO people know this. The Russian people know this. Or at least they should. Let me not be so categorical on that, because a lot of people are making some crazy statements in NATO that I don't know if they're just talking out loud or if they actually believe this stuff. But what I can tell you with a great deal of confidence, Russia can't go and will not go on the attack into NATO, because they want security and they want to end this and leave a rump of a buffer between NATO. So it's irrational to think that they would do otherwise. And we should not even attempt to try and push anything where Putin would ever feel desperate enough that he thinks that nuclear weapons is the only way he can compete against a NATO attack. That's why it's illogical and futile for us to continue to push this on, and why we should absolutely do everything in our power to bring this war to a rapid conclusion. Next in here, what do we got next on our list here? Does Volodymyr Zelensky, does he get to decide when or if the cumulative West goes into these negotiations? I just argued that that's what we should do, but it seems like some argue it's Zelensky's call alone to make, and we're just innocent bystanders. Here's what John Mearsheimer said about that.
President Zelensky, and only President Zelensky, can determine when it's time to sit down with President Putin.
Kirby is speaking nonsense. The fact is, the United States of America is not going to let Ukraine alone determine the course of this war. And in fact, if anybody's going to end up in the driver's seat, it's going to be us, not them. I don't know why he said what he just said, but it's just not the way great power politics works. And a great power like the United States is not going to put its fate in the hands of President Zelensky. We're going to pay attention to what Zelensky wants, and that's appropriate. But the United States will go to great lengths to make sure it gets an outcome that it wants. The problem that we face here is the leaders, people who are in charge of foreign policy, President Biden, Tony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, they basically never took a course in Strategy 101, or if they did take a course in Strategy 101, they failed it. For the most part, they just don't know what they're doing. And I think this is true in Gaza, and I think it's true in Ukraine. I believe we'll end up suffering devastating defeats, both in Ukraine and in the Middle East.
Man, Professor Mearsheimer is certainly the premier thinker, in my view, the premier thinker in foreign policy and international relations in the Western world today, because he has got that sharp intellect in mind that sees things as they are at the strategic level and down even into the operational level, especially when we're talking about conflict, but also understands where things can go and understands where they can't go. and sees what is possible and what's not. And he's always looking to push on the edge of where we can go to succeed, while still staying in the realm of what's possible instead of just going into fantasy. And that's where, as he said, most of our leaders today, either they just don't get it, or somehow they've been so deluded in their minds over so many years of spin and just claiming things to be one way, even when they're not, and there haven't been a consequence and they haven't paid a price for it. So now then they can't distinguish between what is real and what's not, what is possible and what's not. John Mearsheimer is provides so much clarity on that. That's why we'd love to have him on our show, and we keep showing him on here because he does bring absolute clarity. And unfortunately, he thinks that we're probably not going to right the ship in time, and we're going to continue to go down and run it up into the rocks, apparently in the Middle East and here too. And God help us if we keep going in that and do the same thing in the Indo-Pacific, which certainly hope we don't do. But that's one of the big dangers we see. And right now, it's hard to argue with him that our leaders seem to be having us on a course heading for the rocks. And the problem is, it's not a stormy day. The sun is out. It's clear. You can see the rocks, and we're still going that direction anyway. Let us hope, let us pray that something changes between now and the time that hole grinds into the rocks, or it's going to be a cost that none of us want to pay. Those are some of the things we've talked about during the week that we've told you about. That's your intel briefing for what we have done, but things are still happening here. So we want to talk about a couple of things that are coming out of the news even earlier today. One of which is that there's some information out that some of the hostages actually could already be dead. We keep talking about a lot of these issues where we want to have a negotiated settlement or a ceasefire in order to get the hostages back. You hear Netanyahu indefinitely or all the time say, our objective is to get all the hostages back, etc. But here's the reality of it. Because Israel has been unwilling to negotiate, or at least unwilling to meet any of the Hamas's admittedly high demands for negotiations, to get the hostages back, and they have continued this relentless bombing campaign of just wiping out the infrastructure. Almost certainly the chances are, and this is coming in from U.S. intelligence as well as Israeli intelligence, Israel has killed many of the hostages, and it's possible that they've nearly killed them all because they don't know where they are. So when they just casually go and wipe out a city block here, if there were any hostages underneath, they could be dead. Others are reported to have died from wounds suffered in October 7th, or that they had health issues, and because they couldn't get to a hospital, they may have died in captivity. It's uncertain here. But this is one of the things that I said in the first weeks of the war. Israel should have done whatever it took, made any obligation, any requirement, especially in giving hostages for prisoners. That should have been such an easy call to make, that Israel should have said, sure, almost, yeah, you want 1,000 hostages, 1,000 prisoners for our hostages? Okay, 2,000, 3,000, fine, you can have them. Put them all in the Gaza Strip area there. And then they would have had all of their people back. That was a deal that was possible. Netanyahu refused to make it. And now it looks like that it's very possible that many of those hostages have died, and maybe even most of them have died. It's uncertain right now because it's still hard to get a lot of the details out. But apparently that's one of the things holding up a ceasefire negotiations right now, because the Hamas side doesn't have enough hostages to return because most of them are dead. And there has been so much angst and anxiety and anger in Israel, since October the 7th. There have been lots of protests against Netanyahu's rule. Don't get much press here in the Western media, but I assure you it does in Israel. It's hard to miss because they do a lot of it in downtown Tel Aviv. But they have been really angry at Netanyahu for the very reasons I have just outlined. The family members of these people, they know that, look, why haven't you moved heaven and earth to get our hostages back instead of just dropping bombs left and right on these people and shooting missiles and everything else, and having all these troops going into these different areas instead of getting our hostages back? Because here's the thing. Here's why I say that they should have given any price at the beginning, because all you would have done was taken these Palestinian prisoners and put them into the Gaza Strip, where you already have them closed off, so they can't go anywhere. And if that's the cost of getting your people back, then that's easy. And if those people then turned against Israel and picked up arms and fought them, okay, then you're no different off than you are now. It may cost you a little more time and whatever to go get them, assuming they did it right militarily, which they never have. But even at that, then they would have had all their hostages back. And then, frankly, you wouldn't have to worry about killing hostages after that because you would have had them. All those people that you just saw protesting in that picture there, all the family members of these people would have had their loved ones back, and probably he would have gotten even more support. So a lot of this opposition to Netanyahu is because he didn't do what I said there. So it's actually cost him support from the war. And of course, it's causing problems outside here too. But let me just show you, just this is one of the many people. When you see that big swell of people protesting against Netanyahu, some people may wonder sometime in the United States, well, that seems unpatriotic. That here their country's at war, and instead of supporting their prime minister, they're protesting out here. Here's one reason why, and every single one of these 200 some odd people who were eventually taken captive, all of their family members have stories just like this one.
איך אני מגינה פה על הבנות שלי? אנחנו עושים את לא יודעת, 2.5 קילומטר האלה. ואני לא מרימה את הראש. אז אנחנו מגיעים לאיזושהי נקודה. אז אני עוד פעם מתרוממת. ובא מישהו וחוטף לי את הילדה מהידיים. את אמא. פשוט לוקח לי, במצב שבו היא הייתה עליי, הוא בא ולוקח לי, מושך לי את הילדה מהידיים. ובשלב הזה פתחתי את הפה. בשלב הזה ניסיתי לצעוק, בנתי, בנתי, בנתי. זה לא עזר. לקח לי את הילדה, כיוון אל הרובה, סימן לי לשבת. ואין לי מה לעשות. כי אם אני מתה פה, אז גם הבת שלי נשארת לבד, או מתה אחריי. אני לא יכולתי לשמור על הילדה. אני לא יכולתי לשמור על הילדה. על ילדה בת 3 ו3 חודשים.
Now, as you may have read on the top of the screen there, that was one of the few happy endings, relatively speaking, because that child was actually returned when at one of the big hostages exchanges that they did have at the 49th day. But all of the rest of them that beyond that day are just have that anguish about that last moment now half a year later. And now then they start finding out that many of them could be dead and they just don't know. So the anguish is just unrelenting. And look, I think that when the dust settles and people find out what actually happened, Netanyahu is going to have some real trouble. Many speculate that one of the reasons why he's not willing to have a negotiated settlement is because he knows that the day that he makes any kind of pause or that the war is declared over or something, that he will then be deposed because he's extremely unpopular by the general population. And his approval rating prior to 10/7 was in the toilet. It was really low. And a lot of his hardliners are supporting him now as long as he continues the war. But if that stops, then so too will he. And by all accounts, he's basically a dead man walking politically, and that he is destined at some point to be replaced. When that happens and people start then doing investigations and he's no longer in a position of power to suppress those, it's not going to end up well for Netanyahu. I assure you that if he was at risk of going to jail before this happened, I think that he's just laying the foundation for his own journey into jail now, just because of the way he's handled a lot of this situation, because there's going to be some very angry Israeli people when they find out they could have had their loved ones back, but he didn't take any action to prevent it and actually took actions that resulted in their deaths. That's going to be a bitter pill to swallow. We'll be following that one too, tell you how that goes. Last thing we want to talk to you about today is something of a little bit more importance, especially on the intel position for our country. There was an article earlier today that FBI Director Wray, Gary, if you could throw that up there, he warns of a coordinated attack threat to the U.S. in similar to what happened in Russia on March 22nd, when they had that attack at the Crocus City Hall, the concert arena there. You may recall that's where allegedly whether it actually was Ukraine operatives or not, or whether it was just ISIS as they claimed. I'm not here to dismiss that right now. We don't have any knowledge about that. But what is publicly known is that someone claiming to be an ISIS preacher contacted some men who were following some of their activities on the Telegram app. It's kind of like their version of Twitter. And so they had contacted them via that way and said, hey, we want you to do this attack here. We're going to get you some money. We're going to get you some weapons and ammunition. And then you go and you conduct this operation here at the concert arena. And so what Ray is now saying is that same kind of thing is possible here, is that someone could do the same thing here. Now, it's interesting. And the context of him making this comment, by the way, is that he is doing some testifying on Capitol Hill because there is the FISA warrant. You may have heard about this, like this secret government judge that allows wiretapping of American citizens or bugging of American citizens, whatever, that's been going on for a long time, going back to 9/11. And now it's coming up for renewal time or it expires. Now, a lot of people in the intel community want to keep that thing going because they claim that it's necessary to keep us safe. But a great many Americans are saying it's been abused big time and it is not helping us do this other stuff. There are other tools to keep us safe. That's just something to make the government make it easy for them to spy on Americans without their knowledge. So when he makes this statement today that's saying, hey, there's this big risk of this, I got to just say I'm a little skeptical on the timing of it because, frankly, that is not anything new. That's always existed. It's always been a possibility of that. That's why we have so many good ability to track any kind of communications, which we've had, well, for decades, really, so that we can intercept any calls when people are making these kinds of issues. And who knows that may be not one of the reasons why we knew something might happen in Russia, more so here. But he also said this, and we've got a short little clip here of some of the other things he listed out, which has some other things that why we love Deep Dive, because I provide some context with the claims.
As I look back over my career in law enforcement, I would be hard-pressed to think of a time where so many threats to our public safety and national security were so elevated all at once. But that is the case as I sit here today.
Yeah. Why is that? Why is it that it's such an elevated time? Is it just like what George Bush always told us? They hate us because they don't like our freedom. They don't like democracy, so they just hate us. There's no reason. Or is there a reason? When we continue to provide Israel weapons of every kind that are killing tens of thousands of Arab people, the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, when we're attacking the Houthis in Yemen, when we're attacking all these Iran-backed groups in Iraq and in Syria, where we don't need any troops, but we have them there. And so, of course, if they're attacked, they are going to defend themselves. And we keep having lots of airstrikes. We've assassinated people on the street in Baghdad because we didn't like them. So we're angering the Iraqi government, allegedly, who were there to support, even though the people we assassinated were part of the Iraqi government. We'll discuss that one on another date. But you see these kind of things keep going on all over the place. And now then we're, of course, working against Russia here. And now then we're threatening possibly going to war with Iran. We keep on saying, yeah, if anything happens, Biden said just yesterday, just reiterated, if something happens to Israel, we are ironclad in our support for it. So we're building enemies everywhere. We've launched airstrikes into Syria. The last three administrations keep doing that. So we keep building up all these reasons for these people to hate us all over the place. And folks, here's the thing. Those strikes aren't necessary for our security. There are many other countries that have a much bigger stake in keeping the Red Sea open, for example. It doesn't have to be the United States. It doesn't need to be us that goes and blows up people in Yemen where they've already been suffering for war all this time. China actually is the biggest recipient of our help to keeping the Red Sea stuff open because they're the ones that have the most transit going through there through the Suez Canal. Let them handle that stuff. Why does America need to do it? So it's always America. We seem to want to be the first one in line to shoot missiles at somebody, to assassinate somebody, or to shoot somebody down. And all of this builds anger and hatred for us all over the world, especially in the Middle East there. So now when all these groups are opposed to us, and even our troops in Iraq and Syria, even officially, ostensibly, are to continue to try and attack the ISIS, even though from there they pose no threat to us. There's many ways we keep ourselves safe from any terrorist, no matter where they come, anywhere in the world, every day. It is nonsense, and it's so exasperating to me when I hear the claim that, oh, but if we don't have troops there, then they'll come and get us here. Do you realize that on the U.S. terror watch list, there's 70 some odd, I don't remember the number today, it could be 78, 70 something, the different terrorist organizations that are on our watch list. How many do you suppose of the countries where these people live do you think we have troops on the ground to protect us? 3 or 4? 3 or 4, which means that 70 some odd groups are places around the world where we don't have troops, and yet we keep ourselves safe from them every day. So why do I want to have a handful in this country or that country, or a handful in Africa, to try and keep us safe here when we already keep ourselves safe from the other 70? It's irrational. It's illogical. We literally do something that doesn't make any sense and don't answer the obvious questions. Well, how do you keep yourself safe from the other 70 that are everywhere else in the world? Because those don't help us keep us safe. All it does is keep the angst and the animosity high to us. It provides a physical target for them to keep shooting at. And it provides constant reinforming of their hateful groups and their violent people that says, yes, let's keep alive the hatred for America. Here's one of the reasons why, and point to something on the ground there. We are our own worst enemy in this. And listen, the fact that there hasn't been a big terrorist attack in the United States since 9/11, been a couple of small ones, and even then only a couple, has been a remarkable accomplishment, because there are a lot of people who would like to do us harm. So we have a robust issue on the federal, the state, and the local level, and the cooperation we have, the FBI, the CIA, our other intelligence, military, even agencies. A lot of things work together to keep us safe. It's a constant issue, and it's hard. Let's don't make it harder. Let's don't make it harder on ourselves by keeping this actions up abroad that give our enemies reason to hate us more. If anybody wishes us harm and they're going to take action on us, then by all means, let's use our national combat power and military forces and intelligence services, whatever we have, to thwart and destroy that enemy. But we don't need to go seeking after it. And when you sit there in Iraq and in Syria on a routine basis and going after their people, even though they don't have the capacity to come get us here, so you're not stopping anything there, but you are providing a very powerful symbol for them to keep alive the hatred for us, to keep trying to come here. You take our troops out of the way there, now then they're no longer at risk here. Now then you deprive them of a symbol of America that they can hate, because now then there's nothing here. There's nothing for us to go after, and they may go on to something else, or at least it's going to lessen their desire to come get us. That's why this is so important, to have a sane foreign policy, something that makes sense, something that's achievable. There are nefarious actors out there. There are people who wish us harm. Let's have a strong national defense to keep us safe from it. But let's don't go seeking after trouble and helping our enemies by giving them opportunity and symbols to further hate us. That's your deep dive today. That's your intel update. We're probably going to keep doing this here. This is the first one here, but it seems to be something that's pretty good, and I think a new service that we want to provide for our viewers here. So we thank you guys watching here on YouTube. We also thank those who are watching on Twitter. We're actually doing this live on Twitter today. Another one of the first times we have there, because we want more people to get to see what we do here. Be sure to like and subscribe, and please do pass this on to your friends so that they can also enjoy the same kind of things we have. And folks, we're going to have some great shows for you next week, like we always do, and you're not going to want to miss any of them. And that will be all we have for today. Thank you. Have a good weekend, and we'll see you next time on Daniel Davis Deep Dive.